Welcome to another edition of Reptile Fight Club. With me as always, Chuck Poland.
What's up, everybody?
How you been, man?
Good, dude. Good. Busy. Yeah. Ready for the weekend. Long
Excellent.
week. So
Yeah.
how about you?
Yeah. Good. Just Heidi started work up at Utah State, so it's been nice to have her up on campus with me and
Doing lunch
do
dates
lunch together. Yeah.
Nice.
Got
Cool.
a new book to check out. So the secret social lives of reptiles. So I'm excited to dive into that this weekend. Just got that today. So kind of fun. Yeah. The library is ever increasing, but that's
good.
Yeah. Good times.
Yeah. Well, you and our guests today both have extensive libraries. So
definitely. Yeah. We're seeing that right behind him now. So I guess without further ado, we'll bring on Mr. Scott Eipper, the one, the only. How's it going, Scott?
Good. I've actually I've ordered that book that you just picked up, Justin. So I purchased that about 3 months ago. I still haven't so bloody seen it yet. So it looks like it's going to be a ripper though.
Yeah. I'm excited to dive into it. Yeah, Eric had it on our last West Texas trip, so I'd seen it, but I kind of flipped through it. I'm like, I better pick this up. Good stuff. Yeah. Well, you've got quite the extensive library. Do you have
that's only about half of it.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm kind of lucky in that my wife is she's obviously into herps as well, and it's the fact that we're both into herps means that justifying money on reptile books isn't so hard to get across the line sometimes.
That's great. We were actually going to have we've invited some people on to talk about that. Spouses that are either both into herps or one's into herps, one not. Kind of the pros and cons of that scenario.
How that works out,
because that could be very dangerous if you're both into herps. You could wind up in trouble in some ways. But
I can only see that ending in tears. But anyway,
indeed,
that would be one that if you called me out on that, I'd be politely declined.
That's the first response we get. Like, maybe let me check out your podcast, see if that might work. I don't want.
Once people mull it over in their head a little bit, they're like, gonna take a soft pass on this.
Exactly.
What is it? You've got to take into consideration the win out of this, whether there's a win or not.
That's right.
Exactly.
I think the word is the phrase is happy wife, happy life.
I live by
something to that effect. Yeah, of course. We all do. We all die and live by that. That's a statement.
For sure.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, we've brought you on here to talk about taxonomy. So we've kind of had some differing views, maybe not, maybe we have, I don't know. That's why we're bringing you here to hash it out a little and see where we fall. We're going to be talking, I guess, mainly around, carpet python taxonomy to some extent, what where they fit in, how they kind of are related to each other and go from there. So we will have the coin toss here. So
with this coin toss, I'm going to learn from everybody else, right? And I need Chuck to tell me what he's going to go with.
We were actually flipping.
I will call this in the air, Scott, and you can just take the reverse.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm gonna go with. So it's all on you, Chuck, if this goes to shit.
Yeah. That's right. It always goes to shit, and it's always on me anyway. So Scott, we're in this for the penny and the pound.
It's all right. It's all good value anyway.
Well, actually, I gotta say this before the podcast. Chuck and I were chatting, and I flipped the coin 5 times. The first 2 went to me. The last 3 went to Chuck. So it looks like I'm only good on the first toss. So it's
the law of statistical averages. So listen, you might want to work this best 2 out of 3, Scott, is all I'm saying.
We're not going to change policy. All right. Here, we're going one toss. Okay, so call it here. I guess heads. Chuck's calling it. So you're going with tails, Scott?
Yeah, 100%.
And it is tails.
See what I do for you, bro? You see what I do?
Hilarious.
Chuck, we've got it sorted, mate. This is how to make it work.
Listen, You can take me to Vegas as long as you don't listen to what I say. Just do the opposite of what I say. I'll make you a rich man.
Mate, if I go to Vegas, I'm going to be out chasing rattlesnakes. I'm not going to be out doing
Fair enough.
else.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's giving your money away if you're hanging out in the casinos.
Yeah. I already give my money away. It's called Herp Books.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah, I was really looking forward to you making it over for the Herpeton. It's a shame that the virus had to interrupt
When things all get sort of sorted out again, I want to talk to Alan Rapace and say, hey, listen, because, for people that don't know, Alan Rapace and Philip de Vaugelet sort of put on the Herpeton conference, and we can't wait to sort of go. But when we do eventually get over to the States, we're going to talk to Alan about it and say, hey, what's coming up? What can we do? And then maybe we can do something with him on one of his tables at one of the shows or something like that, and at least try and, give some bang for the buck, so to speak. And try and do the best we can. Unfortunately, the way the travel thing were, we couldn't get refunds and we couldn't do this and we couldn't do that, and it was just all bullshit. So what do you do then?
Mess around the world, that's for sure.
There's a lot of people that have suffered COVID a hell of a lot worse than us. None of our friends have passed. So, I think at the end of the day, we've got to put it in perspective and understand that this is a global issue and that it is what it is.
Yeah, I just got an email about a coworker that I used to work with back in the day when I was at my job the first time, and he just passed away from COVID complications, which that's horrible. He's a great guy. So it sucks.
There's been a few herpers that have passed as well, and particularly in the States, and you sit there and you don't really know them. A lot of us don't really know a lot of these people, but of them or you heard their name before or whatever, and it does bring it home. And the media is excellent at sort of hyping things up and making things out to be sort of worse than what it is. I mean, so something about Americans have stride up against Australians being invaded by their government or something like that.
There's so many. The right wing over here that think that Australia is under the government's thumb and they can't do anything and they hate it, and they're itching for rebellion. So.
I think they're just looking for a fight. At the end of the day,
I mean, I think we take the overhyped media to say, oh, it's not really a big deal, and then we kind of go the opposite way, which is not a great plan of action either. Just let it run its course. We'll lose a good 2% of our population, but hey, that's the cost of doing business. I don't think I can get on board with that.
Only if you're not in that 2%. If you're in the 98%, it's okay.
You don't care until it touches you.
Speaking of touching things, let's crack on in regards to touching those buttons.
So we didn't really decide who's taking what side here.
Yeah, you won the coin.
You won the coin toss, so you get to decide your side.
Pick your side.
Well, see, I thought about really throwing Justin for a loop here and actually making him argue that they shouldn't be subspecies.
That's funny because I thought the same thing. I was going to have you argue that they should be,
but I think
that sucks being on the wrong end of the coin toss, doesn't it?
But I think Nick Mutton would actually have a conniption if that was the case. So let's go with.
He doesn't listen. Who are we kidding? He doesn't listen to the podcast.
Yeah, but people will tell him things. So look, let's both play to where we traditionally fit, I suppose.
Sure.
And at that point in time, I think so. We'll go with it. I'm pro subspecific races for some of the carpet pythons, and that. This is restricted, I suppose, to carpet pythons themselves as well, rather than saying that every subspecies should be a race in every species. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. So it's evidence-based approach is what we're looking for here. Okay?
Sure.
So and I think
Justin is going to be what's the Justin argument here, Justin?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the certain ones should be subspecies, or there should be a different division or subspecies arrangement, then I guess, yeah, that's the hard thing is I guess maybe saw it more simplistically as like subspecies versus no subspecies, or subspecies versus races, or however you want to put it. You know, that was kind of,
Yeah, I just want to nail it down so it's clear, which direction each of you are kind of arguing.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty clear in that, there's subspecies, there's races, and that there's species within carpet pythons. Okay, so within the genus Morelia, there's carpet pythons, rough-scale pythons, green pythons, and within the carpet pythons, then you have some subspecific variation. Okay, but there is also races, and the question then becomes is where does a subspecies begin or a species begin, and where does a race begin? And the problem, I suppose, and this is where the debate comes in, is that species, subspecies, and race is arbitrary. All right, we're looking at a snapshot of a period of evolutionary time, and we're trying to place these square pegs in round holes and place things in boxes where we want to put them. And this is where the debate comes in: is where does something generate its own box, or where does it generate its own peg? Or when should it just be pushed within the realm of that peg? And I suppose that's where the question is. And this is why we're always going to see changes in taxonomic nomenclature. And I suppose that's where we're going. And I think that's basically where it's at. Would you agree with that?
I mean, I think I agree with you fully that the taxonomy is arbitrary. It depends on who's doing the research, where they draw the lines. There's no clear rules or as far as where you make the cut. So it's up to whoever's doing the research. And if they're a lumper, then they're going to spin the research to lump everything together. And if they're a splitter, then they're going to split everything apart. So it's really a difficult topic. And so, I mean, this is obviously neither of us are taxonomists. So it's kind of an exercise in, maybe getting our frustrations out by chatting about the things we're frustrated about. I don't know. Or and hopefully, we get some, interesting things discussed and it can be a benefit for the listener. But so I guess I've heard you make some comments about maybe the East Coast carpets, that's all the same thing, that just up and down the East Coast is all the same thing. And I guess that's where I kind of have a differing opinion. and I feel like there's some evidence to support what I'm looking at. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, I guess, and to get this thing started. So
maybe
I don't know.
You being the carpet python, writing the book on carpet pythons, maybe you should give the listeners an overview of what a carpet python is.
Yeah. So there's a group of snakes that we refer to as carpet pythons that would include members of the genus Morelia. Now, more specifically, 3 species: Morelia spilota, Morelia bredli, and Morelia imbricata. And so those are the 3 species that are typically referred to as carpet pythons. Also included in Morelia, as Scott mentioned before, is Morelia viridis and now Morelia azurea, as well as Morelia carinata. And I think that's all that's left after all the other taxonomic revisions that have been done, removing the scrub pythons and Oenpelliensis and things like that. So, so when we're talking carpet pythons, we're talking those 3 species. And, obviously Scott lives in Australia, so he has that nice benefit of being over there. And that's kind of where a lot of my ideas about what carpet pythons are changed, is when I visited Australia and got to see some in the field and kind of got digging a little deeper in the literature. So I think most of my current thinking revolves around some work that's been done initially by Taylor in his doctoral dissertation, and then carried on by Ciavaglia. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but her work in kind of continuing on. Now, this work was done mainly to try to identify different regional, where an animal originated, so they could prosecute in the case of, an illegal animal being apprehended, or somebody, trying to smuggle animals, so they could figure out where that animal came from. Because obviously carpet pythons range up into New Guinea. And so they're allowed to be legally exported and imported into various countries throughout the world. So it is legal to export Morelia spilota from New Guinea. And so, they can't really necessarily hide it if you can figure out where they came from. So that's kind of why they did that research. So, but they did do a very nice sampling, probably the biggest sampling that's been done. And, so that's been very helpful in my thinking in regards to how these things kind of shake out. So I'm basing a lot of my thoughts around their genetic work to some extent. So the other piece of the puzzle, I guess, is the Atlas of Living Australia that records sightings, mostly through scientific studies of where carpet pythons were collected. Some others, like iNaturalist, it records different sightings and localities of where different carpet pythons are found in Australia. And so kind of using those together to delineate where we're finding carpet pythons and where there may be gaps in their distribution. So I'll let you get a word in here.
So the paper that you're referring to, that was published in Forensic Science, used 52 samples that encompassed both Morelia and Somalia. Now, of that, there was a swag of stuff from that looked at the scrub python complex, I suppose, and that shows some interesting things going on there with Kinghorny in regards to the animals from Tully and the animals from the northern part of the Cape, and how they clayed out with the animals in southern New Guinea. And that was one of the reasons why we retained the use of amethystina in our latest snake book, was because the paper by Chippendale et al. That split Kinghorny away from amethystina said that the difference was that they don't come into contact with each other, and that the Torres Strait Islands were the basically the barrier between what is Kinghorny and amethystina.
Yeah.
When you get up onto the Torres Strait Islands, there's scrub pythons all across the Torres Strait Islands. And like we were just sort of discussing in the pre-show, that the Torres Strait Islands have been separated from the Australian, separated from Australia and separated from New Guinea by anywhere between 5,000 and 8,000 years. All right. So it's a very, very short amount of time for something to speciate. And, scrub pythons are a fairly mobile animal, as are carpets, and they tend to move around. So there's probably not enough time realistically for those animals to be separated into two species. There's been, gene flow across the populations. And it's probably the same for a lot of the carpet pythons as well. The carpet pythons are animals that do move around. They're quite mobile. They're generalists in their habitat. They're not specific. They're not restricted to one habitat type, and they do sort of they're happy enough to breed with things as well. So they will breed. Carpet pythons diamond will breed with a coastal carpet, Sensalado, if you want to call them coastals, or whether you want to just call them a northern coloured version of a carpet python. So I suppose what we need to do is determine what carpet pythons are and what the subspecies are within carpet pythons. Now,
so a few clarifications there. Now, when you say, are you saying that diamonds and coastals, or whatever you're calling coastals, are separate? They're different?
No.
Or are you saying same thing?
I'm getting to that. Give me a minute, and I'll
gotcha.
Unpack it.
I'll let you keep going.
Let me just unpack it for a minute, and then by all means, shoot me down. what we need to do is we need to go back to the original descriptions as to what actually defines those subspecies, okay, or species.
Mm-hmm.
So in the case of
Wells and Wellington,
in the case of McDowellii was described as a full species, all right,
mm-hmm.
okay, on the basis that it doesn't look like variegata. Now, its location that it occurs is from northern New South Wales, northern-eastern New South Wales, into North Queensland. It does not occur in New Guinea. There's no comment to suggest that it occurs in New Guinea.
Yeah.
When you read the redescription of variegata in that same paper, it only occurs in the Northern Territory. So the animals in PNG don't occur there according to that paper. All right. They also don't occur in the Kimberley according to that paper either. So you need to then go back and make a determination about where these animals from the Kimberley fit in and where these animals from PNG fit in. Okay.
Yeah.
Likewise with Shanei, which a lot of people call Chenii. It's Shane. It's named after a person named Shane. In regards to Shanei, they're restricted to the Atherton tablelands. That was the extent of the description. All right. It was a contrasting coloured carpet python from the Atherton tablelands. That's the distinction. Now, the Atherton tablelands, where that occurs within the distribution of what they called McDowellii. So you've got Shanei and McDowellii that aren't separated from each other. They used images in other papers to suggest this is how to tell them apart. And they made reference to type specimens. In the case of McCarthy, it was described from a head alone. It didn't have a body from the Warren Bungles. And yet they described other specimens and said that there's a pattern difference between them and McDowellii. So while taxonomy has changed a hell of a lot over the last couple of hundred years, it does make it quite difficult to ascertain what these things are from the original descriptions. And so there's been a lot of inference and a lot of questioning about what defines a Murray-Darling carpet, a coastal carpet, a jungle carpet python, or a top-end carpet. And really the first publication that really sort of spelled it out quite well was Barker and Barker in 1994. They provided photos, they provided the original descriptions, and then they made their distinctions based on what they thought. At that point in time, after you get to that point, what starts to happen is then people start to use these things called genetics to then start looking at the differences between different populations from a genetic point of view. And it's been shown and demonstrated that there's not a lot of support for all of these subspecies as they were originally described, and that the carpet pythons from the south coast, inclusive of diamond pythons, which are the type species, coming straight up across the eastern seaboard up into North Queensland and then across. There's very, very little gene description differences between the carpet pythons, with the exception of inland carpets. Inland carpets have got some genetic distinction to them, and there's a bit of structuring there.
Now, when you say there's little, what studies are you basing that on?
There was I'm trying to remember the percentile. I think it was out of Rawlings. It was like 1 or 2%.
Rawlings, I mean, they didn't really. I mean, they just used a couple specimens, right? I guess that's my thing. Is a lot of the analysis only uses 1 or 2 specimens. So, I mean, they did show Rawlings. I think showed Morelia spilota versus Morelia spilota variegata. They had those two separated out. Was it Rawlings? I believe that was the paper, or Reynolds.
Might be Reynolds. I think you're thinking of the Reynolds paper.
It is Reynolds. Yep.
So when you look at the paper from Clavaglia, I'm butchering that name too, so we can both put it together. When you look at that paper,
sounded good to me.
The interesting part is there's some fairly good support for imbricata and Bredli. a Bredli, I should say. And the sister taxa to Bredli is diamond pythons.
Yeah, okay. and they're very close on
from Tilba
genetic
and
analysis.
Gosford.
Okay. Gosford, yeah.
Then you have the animals from the southern New Guinea onto Cape York.
Cape York. Yeah.
They sit there with the animals from Darwin, northern
northern Cape York, right? Not the whole of Cape York, but more
down to Cape Trib.
Yeah.
So they're coming down a pretty far way. Cape Tribulation's only,
McElwraith
Cape Tribulation's only 70 kilometers, 150 kilometers north of Cairns.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that far north. It goes down a fair way.
But the Cape Trib, they fit up further up? Because all I'm seeing grouped with the Darwin and the PNG was McElwraith ranges.
Go to page 302 if you're looking at the paper.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
All right. But anyway, if we then go further up, you've got animals from Kapara. Now, Kapara in New South Wales is northeast of Taree, which is down near Gloucester, which is really close to Sydney. We're talking a couple of 100 kilometres away from the type locality of where Spilota is probably originated from. And they sit with the animals from Metcalfe sitting within that group. So you've got these animals from Mackay, Townsville, and Tully that sit in between the animals from the southeastern Australian inland carpets versus the far western, northeastern type South Australian, Western Queensland, the reddish orange McCarthy, I suppose.
The Flinders and Gammons ranges group.
So those two sort of sit. So then it becomes a little bit sort of convoluted.
Mm-hmm.
Does the animals from Mackay, Townsville, and Tully, are they inland carpets?
No, I guess that's my thoughts on this, is because I see these splits and separations, and it tells me that they're different. Like, they're not the same. I mean, they have an independent grouping, right? I mean, just like your the Northern Territory, New Guinea stuff is not, it's grouped together in a nice little grouping, just like the diamonds and the Bredli and all these. I guess that's what I'm looking at when I say there's some structure here. And because they fit in between these things, it suggests to me that means they're in separate or independent.
Look how shallow those nodes are.
Yeah, and then I guess that's where my failure at understanding taxonomy comes in, because I guess I just look at the groupings and see that of course the stuff from Townsville, Mackay, and Tully are not the same as the stuff from the center of Australia, over by closer to Bredli than to any other carpets,
Well, the ones that are closest to Bredli are diamond pythons.
Yeah.
According to this, they're diamond pythons.
Yeah. And I guess that's kind of the maybe the genetics doesn't go all the way. Right. It can give you an idea of how things piece out and how things structure out, but genetics isn't everything. Right. No, I mean, I think you'd agree with that. So
it's a good indicating
place to start. Right. It gives you a place to start. Yeah. And I guess taking those, obviously the Northern Territory, PNG, Cape York stuff, that's kind of a nice little package. Right. They all fit in nicely genetically to one another. And they're fairly somewhat diverse from the other groups, according to my eyes. I don't know if that means anything. And I keep meaning to talk to Warren Booth to try to get some insight into how this stuff shakes out, genetics wise. But when I look at other things, other factors like biogeographical barriers, right, that the Gulf of Carpentaria, right, that barrier there, that separates out those Northern Territory carpets from pretty much anything on the East Coast. There's no gene flow between what we typically call a Darwin carpet and anything on the East Coast.
But there used to be an inland sea.
The
Gulf of Carpentaria used to be an inland sea.
And so I guess what I'm saying is that the only gene flow that occurred was probably between PNG and the
southern side of the Gulf.
Yeah. And that was separated more than, so the Cape York stuff and the PNG stuff, that was more recent, but the Darwin New Guinea split happened further back, right? And you can kind of see that to some extent because you've got your Melville Island, Darwin, Connor kind of a little subgroup, whatever you'd call that, versus your McElwraith, Cape Trib, Merauke, and Port Moresby grouping. So
you've got an eastern and a western lineage.
Yeah, and that fits with kind of what you would expect based on where they're at now. And that's all we're looking at as a snapshot. So would you say they're all the same? I mean, they're closer related to each other than anything else, but they've been split for 10,000 years. How long do you need to kind of form a subspecies or a species? And,
it depends.
10,000 years is pretty good. And
that's the interesting part, isn't it? You've got, I suppose you need to convincingly work out what species concept you're going to go with. Whether it's a biological species concept, a phylogenetic species concept, or whatever. And each one of those have got different arbitrary rules as to what is what.
And where a ball python and a Woma python, arguably the most basal and the most derived pythons, can interbreed and produce fertile offspring, that's kind of an indication that the biological species concept doesn't quite fit well with reptiles, with pythons. So I guess. Go ahead.
I suppose the other thing that's to be considered as well is that this paper is used two genes as well. It used cytochrome B and ND6, I believe. So, a lot of the newer genetics work, and as we've both said, we're not geneticists, so we're probably butchering this completely. But my understanding is that you need to have more genes, the better resolution, the better understanding of what you're getting out of. Having a single gene or a couple of genes can lead you down a path of down an arbitrary path that isn't necessarily accurate. So we need to keep that into consideration. The other point that I would like to make in that.
Oh, before you move on to another point, I along with that, right, I think you get gene jockeys that do their analysis and they show some split and they go, oh, there it is. That's the split. And they go with that, even though the biogeography or the just, species that fit together nicely, and share a lot of different traits and share, they're put into separate genera, even sometimes, the recent paper on Gonyosoma and some of the issues with that, where really you're gonna split those up, even though they are basically the same snake.
But then you have great papers too, like that one that just came out recently, in regards to green pythons that split Azuria and Viridis.
And they did quite a deep dive on the genetics, right?
And partitioned Azuria into what I think it was 3 subspecies. I think.
Which was a little surprising for Donnellan, because he seems to not like subspecies.
Yeah,
he's always kind of been a good subspecies, but
I'm not sure.
It was interesting to see him.
Steve's published some papers recently using subspecies. His paper on Helioporus australiacus.
Softening on it a little.
Helioporus australiacus was split into 2 subspecies rather than 2 species, and
other papers like the Depressa complex, where we get 4 or 5, 4 different species out of what was formerly Gurnia depressa. That's and most people who knew about those species knew that was the thing. That was the case, and so not really surprising.
Cunningham skinks, and there's a whole swag of stuff that everybody is pretty well aware that there's some speciation or something going on there that just hasn't been sort of pushed out. And I think in fairness, this paper that we're referring to with regards to the carpet pythons, we need to also take into account that they have left them and retained them as Spilota in this particular paper. And that they said that Bredli was distinct, and they said that Imbricata was distinct as a subspecies. Now, a number of people have then taken a different view of that. You guys were sort of the first guys, with the exception of Wells and Wellington, to apply a full species to Imbricata, which is something I agree with. And I think the genetics from that paper fairly clearly demonstrates that is a good decision as well. And so, where we maintained the use of Imbricata as a full species, as we did with Bredli. However, the rest, there seems to be a lot of gene flow between those two populations. Now, looking at carpet pythons here in Australia, when you're looking at a carpet python from the northeast coast of New South Wales, it's a slow climb down to a diamond python, and it's a slow climb to a coastal carpet python. And you have all of these animals over about a 350-odd kilometre location that all look a bit like this or a bit like that. And then it's the same thing when you get into North Queensland when it comes to jungle carpet pythons. Now, you look at jungle carpet pythons to me appear to be the phenotype that we call jungle carpet pythons tends to be a python that lives in rainforest, a carpet python that lives with rainforest. But they remain small, all right? They don't seem to be too large. And the reason, the thought process I have in regards to why they remain small is that scrub pythons outcompete carpet pythons in the rainforest. So scrub pythons are this big, large animal that occupies the top tier snake predator within the rainforest. And so the carpet pythons occupy a smaller niche for a second tier predator. All right. Now, when you get out onto the drier locations in North Queensland, where the carpet pythons do better than scrub pythons, all right, you start to get the big carpet pythons again. Okay. Yeah. Now, if you go to a place called Croombit Tops, which is inland southeast from a place called Calliope down near about 400 kilometres north of Brisbane, the carpet pythons that you get in the gorges of Croombit Tops are tiny, small, highly contrasting carpet pythons, because a strongly contrasting carpet python is an animal that effectively camouflages in dappled light. Okay, if you have something that's all a solid color, it's not going to sort of live a very long time, I suppose, because there's things out there that'll eat them, and that dappled light sort of helps. So it would seem that the jungle carpet pythons, or what we call jungle carpet pythons, that phenotype is repeated where you have rainforest.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, that's kind of what changed my thinking in regards to jungle carpets, was seeing a carpet python on Mount Glorious or kind of heading up there. And I mean, it had the same bold pattern, black and yellow, as you would expect from a jungle carpet. So, I can see that shared phenotype based on habitat. And I think we see that fairly consistently. But now, and that could be a somewhat of a false equivalency if you're only going by phenotype or you're only going by genotype. You could say, well, they look the same, so they're the same thing. So then, and green trees look very similar to each other, but they're very diverse, and we've got two species. And
so to continue that on, because it
goes to the measure, though, right?
Sorry, what was that?
It goes to the measure. I mean, what are your measures for what you're like? Obviously, like carpet pythons, jungle carpet pythons, they have a food partitioning. They're niche food partitioned with scrub pythons, right? But they're still the same thing genetically, right? That's kind of what we're saying. So it's not a difference really. It's where they fit in the habitat that they occupy, right?
Yeah. I wouldn't say they're genetically different from the coastal carpets that you find further west in that area. But so Scott can proceed with his point there.
Yeah, sorry.
So to continue up we've continued from the southern part of the range, and we've gone further north. Now, in Australia, it's the southern hemisphere is obviously the opposite to the northern hemisphere. The further north you go, the warmer it becomes. Okay, so we've gone from animals that are dark in color, really dark in color, basically to absorb sunlight, and as you go further north, they become consistently lighter. And so you go from an animal that's almost all black with yellow spots or white spots in a diamond python. As you go further north and you get up to savanna, into the savanna country of northern Cape York Peninsula, and then across under the Gulf, across to the Northern Territory, and then into WA, the carpet pythons are living in savanna for the most part. And so they're pale yellow, orange, red, whites, and they're relatively small, but they basically occupy this color. They've got this northern coloration form, I suppose, if you will, and you see that on Cape York. You see those animals from Archer River as far down as Cooktown. These carpet pythons are the animals around black.
They're indistinguishable from what you would call a Darwin carpet, or a one from New Guinea.
Or what are they called? You can't call them IJs anymore, can you?
We're calling them New Guinea carpets in the
New Guinea carpets, Papuan carpets.
New Guinea's the island,
whatever,
and they're found on New Guinea. So that's what I'm going with.
But they are found in Australia as well.
Mm-hmm.
They're found on Cape York Peninsula. They look identical. They don't look any different. So to suggest that there are different taxons, I don't think it's accurate.
We definitely reject Harrisoni.
So I suppose basically across the northeast of Australia and then down the east coast, you have one highly ranging species, and it's probably the best way to describe it is what people use the concept of a ring species or a ring species concept. So a ring species concept, do you know what a ring species concept is or not? So know from birds or
mainly from salamanders in California, where they show there's the species migrate around a barrier, be it a high mountaintop or something like that, as they move around the barrier and eventually come back in contact with kind of the population that started. The population that ends and the population that started can't breed with each other, but they can kind of breed with populations around the ring.
Correct. And so essentially what we're looking at in carpet pythons is we're looking at a ring that's 2/3 of the way around, in that it runs across the top of Australia into southern New Guinea or across Saul. If we want to use Saul, it's probably a better descriptor, because at the end of the day, the seas are only there now as opposed to when they were originally there. Across the southern part of Saul and then down the east coast of Australia. And so, yes, the carpet pythons at Eden or Malakuta or Cairn River, i.e. diamond pythons, look radically different to the animals from the top end. I'm not suggesting that they don't. I'm not suggesting that there wouldn't be a little bit of genetic divergence between those two populations.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, there is an explanation as to why they look so different. Now, as an example for that, we look at something that has a distribution that almost identically marries carpet pythons, that we don't have much of an argument in regards to whether or not they should be a whole heap of different species, is blue-tongued skinks. The legal skincoides has almost an identical distribution to carpet pythons. And yet we do not see any subspecies that are widely recognised within skincoides, as opposed, with the exception of evanescens from the Key Islands in New Guinea that was described by Shea, and intermedia. But where intermedia start and stop is also a really weird amalgamation, and it tends to happen in far north Queensland. So you would think that animals that live in similar habitats that have similar pressures would probably evolve at a similar rate. And I struggle to tell the difference between carpet pythons across much of northeastern New South Wales through to Queensland, and being able to confidently assign an animal to that location.
Mm-hmm. So I agree with you in a lot of respects here, and I think that's good line of thinking, and that they all came from a common ancestor. Now, I guess the idea is as they move, and obviously imbricata and Brettle Lee kind of got stuck or marooned, right? And I was talking to Nick about this, and he was talking about the last glacial maximum, and he told me, like, just because there was more land showing, that doesn't necessarily mean that Australia was wetter. Australia was actually drier during the last glacial maximum than it is now, and so they were perhaps more isolated and allowed to kind of be on a different evolutionary trajectory. And species moving around, I wanted to, you mentioned that earlier, and I wanted to kind of hit on that a little bit. Now, carpet pythons tend to kind of move along rivers and through trees, and that's a very integral habitat for carpet pythons in general. Is tree-lined water courses. Now, where the water courses flow will depend on where the trees are. And so it makes sense that, trees and carpet pythons go hand in hand. And so if you've got a river that was once flowing one way, kind of like I was listening to a researcher, he was talking, it was on the Aussie Wildlife Show, talking about inland carpet pythons and his research there. And there was a river that used to flow between the area, the Gammons and Flinders, that area, down into what's that.
So that was the Diamantina River used to flow down through that area, and then and then that would flow into the Darling around Cunnamulla, and it then flows from the Darling, then joins around, I think it's in western New South Wales around Wilcannia, where it joins into the Murray.
And so that was that flow was disrupted or altered in some way, and it kind of stopped that flow, right? So you've got a marooning maybe of those carpet pythons that are up north of in the Gammon Ranges and north up there. So, I think that is the heart of this, I guess, is how long do you need to be separated, and how long do you need to be marooned to become another species, and how deep do the divergences? I mean, what we're looking at is a snapshot, right? And that could all change. Also, there's some, I got to thinking about human interference. I mean, when people populate an area, they generally plant trees, which would allow carpets to maybe flow across areas that previous to that, they don't flow. Right. In the first edition of the carpet book, we talked a lot about the Black Mountain Corridor and that biogeographical barrier there, and that some indication of genetic analysis of carpets above and below the Black Mountain Corridor have, differences, or they show some separation. And so, extending that to other barriers throughout Australia could play a role in telling the story of how carpets got to where they are, and how they're isolated from different populations that may be close. Now, there are some so there's also a biogeographical barrier called the Lara Basin biogeographical barrier that's up kind of below Cohen, kind of where below the McElwraith and Iron Ranges there, and it's a fairly broad barrier, and it's a barrier not just to reptiles but also to mammals and other things. Plants. And so you see, exactly, you see separation of things above and below that, and that kind of seems where there's a dearth of records of carpet pythons within that area. You see maybe 150 kilometer gap in records in that area. Now, that's not a very highly sampled area, I'd say, and it's not easy to get around in there. There's very limited roads and things like that, so it's hard to say if that's the true vision of it, but
there's a collection bias to areas that are easily located, easily
exactly.
accessible.
So, did you say dearth? Did you say dearth? What is a dearth? I'm not familiar with dearth.
A lack or a low, amount.
All right. See, folks, I learned something today.
There we go.
Sorry,
you learned more than just the definition.
No, I know. I was being facetious, but
so anyway, there's all these biogeographical barriers, and wouldn't you know it, they correspond with the breaks that Ciavaglia is showing, and it corresponds to some extent with what we would call this or that or the other. The animals in the Iron Range or that look like Darwin carpets, and the animals in PNG that look very similar to those. They all fit genetically together.
Hang on a second. What? We can't say that because they specifically don't do that.
What do you mean?
If you're saying that the range at Cohen splits the animals from the animals that are south of that, right? Mm-hmm. Then Cape Tribulation is well and truly south of Cohen. Merauke and Port Moresby is well and the Micklewraith is well and truly north of Cohen.
Yeah.
So that gap does not work.
I mean, maybe not completely or wholesale, but there is they're kind of maybe fitting somewhat intermediately. It's not a distinct line that says here's where it is, and there could be some flow that occurred at some point.
We're not talking about a line. We're talking about in that particular case, we're talking about 800 kilometers. Pretty big area that we're talking about.
Yeah. But I guess the concept though of these biogeographical barriers corresponding somewhat to the breaks. Now the Ciavaglia group actually extends that below Cohen and down into down to the Black Mountain Corridor. So they say everything north of the Black Mountain Corridor, including New Guinea and Darwin, kind of grouped together, and they're genetically similar. So I guess,
So, and then also
what about the animals? What about the animals south of that? So if they're different from between north of the Black Mountain Corridor and south of the Black Mountain Corridor, what are we calling those?
So in my mind, within coastal carpets, though, they've got 6 samples in that paper that are south of the Black Mountain Corridor, right? You have 4 of them, 3 of them. So Mackay, Townsville, and Tully. Mm-hmm. They sit in between the 2 populations of what
and that's where I'm going.
And then they have 2 samples, right, in being Kapira and Brisbane that fit within coastals.
And that's where I'm going with that. So you've got, it's not a great sampling, but it does line up nicely with different biogeographical barriers, right? So if you go south of the,
none of that sampling is awesome, right? Like we're not talking about definitive numbers.
When you talk about awesome sampling, like no papers really have awesome sampling.
That's what I'm saying. And it gives you some indication, but it's not. There's no, to rely. The sampling is anecdotal, almost.
Not necessarily.
Better than nothing, but certainly not conclusive to anything.
Yeah, I suppose say it's anecdotal.
And that's where I'm sort of going with it, is that the sampling is much better than nothing. But at the same time, if we use McDowell as McDowell is currently being, right? We can only argue about what we can argue about at the moment, Justin.
Sure,
so let's go with that, right?
I'll go there.
If we use McDowell as it is at the moment, it sits within both McCarthy and Variegata. So Variegata, McCarthy, and McDowell, all of those things are the same thing according to the genetics on this paper.
Unless you were to dive down
and split them a different way,
or split them different way, and that's kind of what I'm arguing, is that the way they split them doesn't make any sense, and I think we're in agreement there, because that's kind of what you just said, and I would agree, the thinking that I've got going now, and who knows. it is that you go on the genetics, you go on the biogeography, and then you can go on, phenotype to a lesser extent. Carpet pythons are highly variable. And so, like we were talking about, you can see something that looks just like a jungle, very, very far away from where you would find a jungle. And so a lot of, I think carpets in their, common ancestor probably had, a wide variety of looks. And so depending on where they're living, they can kind of adapt and blend in and develop a certain phenotype based on which ones don't get picked off and which ones go on to breed, because they blend in better with their backgrounds. A dark black and yellow snake blends in better in the dappled light of the forest, whereas a straw colored brown snake blends in better with, drier savanna type.
And you probably have environmental factors like, temperature and things like that at play as well, which will affect how they color to maybe absorb or not absorb, thermal insulation better or worse. Like, I think there's a lot of things going on there.
Yeah. Exactly. So I suppose too, because there is all of these things going on, and it does seem to be a little bit arbitrary about the way we selected this stuff. This is where we utilize something out of birds, as opposed to, and bird people use this a lot as, I'm not a birdo by any stretch of imagination. Avian reptiles are not my thing. However, they have this beautiful thing that they refer to as races, and races are an interesting concept in that it's an interest-specific category that sits below a subspecies that allows somebody to take a geographical variant or a phenotype and apply a name to it. Okay. Now it's not a taxonomic name. It doesn't have any nomenclatural standing, but it allows people to clearly define a particular race or a particular phenotype. All right. So in the case of, when we relate that back to reptile husbandry, that allows people to have a race of carpet pythons that is highly contrasting, and it might be black and white or black and yellow, and they happen to live in the rainforest. Okay, so that would be, we call them jungle carpets. Now, the three of us have all got an idea in our heads of what a jungle carpet python looks like. All right, but to actually quantify what that carpet might looks like, and why that jungle looks like this, but that coastal that has a similar pattern, and if you were to write it down, describes almost identically, doesn't fit.
Yeah.
Right? And so this is where the term race is actually a nice way to use it. And that is why we use the term race in the book as opposed to using a nomenclatural point when the genetics obviously needs more work. All right. When the specific definitions via the descriptions of those particular species has a lot of inference. And so because it couldn't clearly be understood genetically, and it couldn't clearly be understood from a nomenclatural point of view as the descriptions, we then opted to go with race. And so, we threw another thing in the mix, which sort of confused people a little bit, and pissed a few people off, I suppose. But at the same time, it does fit quite well. And it's the same thing. You can apply that to blue tongues as well. You can go, that's a blue tongue from east of the Great Dividing Range, from the southern part of its range. That's a northeast Queensland blue tongue. That's a blue tongue from
Kimberley
from
region.
here. Or you can do that with shingleback skinks, or you can do that with Cunningham skinks. You can do that with all of these things, and you can actually maintain captive populations. We have Cunningham skinks. We have Sydney sandstone form. We have granite belt animals. We used to have the woodland forms. We used to have the southern Victorian forms. And we used to keep them all separate. They're all Cunningham skinks. Some of them have got subspecies. Some of them have got names that have been applied to them but haven't been accepted by the wider community. But we kept them as separate ESUs or races.
And this is something, Scott, that you would say like we are into like locality animals here, right? And so for us, like maybe what you're saying is a race has much more applicability than a locality would.
Yep, correct.
So now, if somebody hates jungles, do you get to call them a racist? That's the question.
Well,
That was horrible.
Okay,
that was a dad joke right there.
Yeah, that was not even the greatest dad joke ever.
But I suppose though, let's use that with scrub pythons, right? And you know, we can use that with scrubbies and say, you know, we're going to go the animals from Yamdena in the Key Island group versus the animals from Tanimbar. Even though they're both Norta, you may want to retain those and keep those either as localities or keep them as races. It might be this is the Tanimbar race, or this is the Yamdena race, or you know, your green pythons from Iron Range versus the animals from the port of Merauke. Or whatever. So you can do that. You can keep that partitioning, but you're not then making an assumption as to whether they should be different species or not. And we see that a lot in children's pythons and spotted pythons and Stimson's pythons. Mount Carbine, Cape York. You see where I'm going with this? You know, the pygmy band, the pygmy band.
I would say those pygmy bandits, there's not much doubt in my mind. There's something different than a Stimson's or a spotted or a children's. I mean, scale count wise, morphologically, you know.
But in the interim, until something's published, by using a race, applying a race, or applying a race gives a little bit more. Excuse me. Applies a little bit more sort of structure, I suppose, to just a locality.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's what this is you know, circling around is how do you structure it, and what we're saying is what is biologically significant, right? And if you identify something that's biologically significant, then you apply a term to that animal, be it race or subspecies or whatnot. And so I think, you know, the current construction of what we think of as a grouping, like say McDowellii, is off, and it probably could be divided into several different subspecies, races, whatever you want to call them. And you know, depending on who's doing the work, gets to decide if they're a subspecies or a race or a species or whatever. You know, if we go by Wells and Wellington, we've got Shaney and McDowellii and Metcalfii. But you know, based on the current best information,
as full species.
Yeah, exactly. And I'd go back to maybe, you know, in regards to diamonds being something somewhat different. If you go back to the Ciavaglia data, they're grouped with Bredli, right?
So you're thinking Bredli?
Well, I'm not saying that they're Bredli, and there is a fairly, you know, a node between the two. They're separated by something, right? And so I'm just saying that indicates that their genetics are quite a bit different than the other. Why didn't they group with the coastals? You know, why didn't they group with the things that we think they're the same as, or think they're the same as?
Because they potentially use two. They only use two genes.
Two regions, right? So they used parts of two different genes. Yeah. So and would a different analysis show a completely different thing? Yeah. Probably.
Potentially.
Yeah. And I mean, you can look at thousands of genes that would put them identical with everything else, but it's the genes that change quickly and the gene that maybe offer more insight into what's going on. Now, I think diamonds have evolved into different niches or nippers. I don't know if you caught that from one of our last episodes, but where Nipper threw such a fit about the way people said niche that we
renamed. Some people say niche.
Yeah, niche is now a nipper.
We're just calling it a nipper.
Done. It's done.
Yeah. So anyway, you know,
you can have a cup of tea and harden up. Tell him to back off.
Yeah. So you know, they've diverged enough, you know, in the way that they live, you know, and the cold tolerance or whatnot, and Their phenotype pattern is fairly unique among carpets. You don't see that in different localities or races, and so and there have been historically biogeographical barriers between the areas where diamonds are found and the rest of the carpets. And also the fact that there is an intergrade zone, where you do see kind of a intermediate form between diamonds and coastals where, they come into contact, tells me that, that's probably something different or something, at least the migdali or whatever subspecies is different in that regard, rather than just a race. But
so I don't quite follow. I don't understand where you're going with that. If diamond pythons were different to migdali, you should not see any gene flow between those two populations.
See, that's where I disagree. I think we're applying different species concepts. I think that there can be gene flow between separate species. And I'd go back to saying, womas and ball pythons can breed and produce offspring.
The womas and ball pythons naturally don't come in contact with each other either.
That's true.
So then to suggest that because womas and ball pythons can be put in a box together and breed.
No, the point is that just because an animal can breed with each other doesn't make it the same species, is what I'm saying. So just because a coastal and a diamond can breed together doesn't mean it's the same species. Just because gene flow occurs doesn't make it the same species. There can be hybrids and intergrades, of naturally occurring species and well-documented species.
But they need to maintain still some level of partitioning within that species.
And I think they do. I mean, you only see those intergrades within a certain area in Australia. You told me how wide is that?
So 350 kilometers, 500 kilometers.
So with that idea of northern ranging coastals and southern ranging, diamonds being something different than those intergrade zone, diamond kind of coastal whatevers. Is that kind of what you're saying, Justin? Is that kind of the gist?
Yeah, that there is an intergrade zone or whatever is kind of the point of that. I guess.
But that clearly those that migdali and spilota have complete gene flow, right? And they have an intergrade zone. But are we saying that in the northern range of coastals and the southern range of diamond pythons could potentially be something different? That's why I'm trying to.
Yeah, I mean, well, and again, it goes back to biogeographical barriers. You did have a biogeographical barrier between what you would call a diamond python and what you would call a migdali occurred in the past. There was a. I'm not recalling the name of it. And we've got a lot of detail in the second edition of the Complete Carpet Python.
I'll be very interested to read it.
Soon.
Yeah. Because I can't think of anything that has that distribution pattern in Australia.
And that's the problem is or that's what I referred to as the human factor where that's the most densely populated area of Australia, and you have a lot of interruptions maybe into those biogeographical barriers. We only have a snapshot after things have been developed and trees have interrupted those barriers, and so
you're talking about human population or human cities being potential bridges, genetic flow barriers.
Bridges to genetic barriers.
Okay. I see.
Where they couldn't cross before, they can cross after people develop those areas.
So you're suggesting in the last 230 years that we have provided bridges for carpet pythons to reintegrate with each other.
Potentially. That's an idea that's floating around.
A hypothesis
has some. Yeah, it's a hypothesis that has some support, I guess you'd say.
I'd be very interested in reading the support for that idea.
Yeah. And I guess that's the problem. We probably should have the show after the book was put out so we could hear, because I don't want to give away too much, but Different biogeographical barriers, different other biotic factors come into account, or abiotic factors rather. Yeah.
So I'll touch on, anthropogenic movement of species, I suppose, if you will, is probably the best way to describe in regards to carpet pythons. So carpet pythons have a long history, certainly in Australia, of when people were farming, they would use carpet pythons as rat control in their farm sheds, right? So that farmer would come across a carpet python, he'd take it to his shed, stick it in the shed, and that would hopefully control the rats and mice. Now, when that farmer sold up and he moved from one part of New South Wales or Queensland to another part of New South Wales or Queensland, he'd go and catch Barry the carpet python, and he would then take it with him and release it in his new shed. Okay, now and effectively translocate things around.
Sure.
There's a reasonable history of that going on.
And the fact that carpets adapt very well to human interruption. If they're planting trees, you'll find carpets very close to human habitation. I mean,
man, if you got an attic, you can find them in there.
Yeah, I mean, what 1/3 of attics in Darwin have a carpet? Yeah,
carpet pythons live in every second house in South Queensland. Yeah. So,
exactly. And you go out bush, and it's a little harder to find them.
Yeah, I found more carpet pythons. I think we're up to 16 or 17 different individual carpet pythons that have cruised through our backyard in the 10 years that we've been living here. So, it's nuts. But I suppose the point that I'm making is that there is some evidence of change of people moving animals around.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily demonstrate that they're going to cause a speciation event or anything like that. What I'm talking about is I'm not seeing any amalgamation or separation between the animals that in the intergrade zone, for lack of a better term, between Spilota and McDowell. I don't see it. I don't see it, and I've caught a shitload of carpet pythons / diamond pythons in that part of the world over the years and seen a hell of a lot of them, and I don't see the difference. Now, I'm not saying that because I don't see it doesn't mean it's not there. But what I'd like to do, or what I'd like to understand, is what you guys are saying that I'm not.
No, I mean, I agree with you, and that's been a bit of a frustration, is to get kind of that delimitation of where the intergrade zone exists. But I guess what I'm, back to the Sea of Aglaia paper, I look at that and I say there's some differences in genetics, whether it's two genes or whatnot. There still is some indication that they're fairly divergent from other carpet pythons.
And it kind of goes back to it goes back to the measure, right? I mean, phenotypically, if you're talking phenotypically, I would probably go 100% with what Scott's saying, because he's probably looked at way more of them than either of us could possibly see, right? But if you're talking genetically, I mean, I don't know how well that's been studied. I'm just,
that's kind of what's leading my thoughts in that regard, is that this genetic analysis, the for better or worse, the best one we have at this point shows that diamonds have a fairly divergent genotype.
And that they are Brettles.
That they're Brettly, or they align closely.
So what you're saying is that Brettly should be sunk into Spilota. That's what you're telling us right now. If you're going to use the genetics, hang on, Justin.
What I'm saying is,
genetics, you've got to use it both ways, right?
Well, no, because I'm saying genetics aren't everything, but they're something. Right, so there is an indication there's some differences. That's why you have eyes. Because if you look at the genetics and that's all you look at, then you would say, yeah, they're the same thing. But if you have eyes and you know where they live, then you can say, no, genetics aren't everything. It's something, but it's not everything. So yeah, they're divergent from other carpets, but are they Brettly? Of course not. Are they, is there any gene flow between them and Brettly? Of course not. So why are they so aligned? Why are they so separated from other carpets?
But genetically, by the measure that they're looking at genetically through time, those genes, what you're looking at is the divergence of those genes over time, right?
Yeah,
and maybe
sure.
not all genes diverge at the same
Right.
rate, not the measure, or so.
Exactly.
It is again, clearly it says what it says, and that is something, but maybe not the whole story.
Yeah,
Is that fair to say? I mean,
and so
and part of a measure, but maybe not the whole measure.
It's
right?
all in good fun to debate this stuff,
for sure.
But
for sure.
But I would say there's some indication that diamonds are a little different than other carpets. If Bredli are different than other carpets, then diamonds are a little bit different too, in that same way. Not saying that they're the same thing or they have gene flow, but they're different.
So if that was the case, then you would be sinking. You would retain the name McDowell and sink McCarthy into McDowley.
Why would that?
Well, actually, you sink them all into Shanei, because Shanei is the oldest name.
Well, okay, so I'll go back to.
So if we're go with that, if we're suggesting that all of that diamonds are a distinct species, and that Bredli is a distinct species, then the animals that include what is known as McCarthy, Shaney, and McDowell should go to the oldest available name. All right, the oldest available name for all of those by page priority is Shaney.
Mm-hmm.
So then McDowell goes, McCarthy goes.
I'm not sure how you came to that conclusion from what I'm saying. I lost.
No. So you've got to use page priority of the earliest available name for that node.
Yeah.
Okay. Right? So the earliest available, the highest thing on the page, Morelia Shanei came before Morelia McDowell.
Okay.
All right. And McCarthy was described in 1985 versus the other one's described in 83. Mm-hmm. So the oldest available name for that group would be Shaney.
So you're saying if Spelota are a different species than the carpets to the north, then you'd have to apply.
The name would be Shaney, not McDowell, not McCarthy. If they all form one. Variegata actually. Variegata is the oldest.
Yeah, Variegata is oldest.
Sorry, Variegata is the oldest. So Variegata is the oldest name. So they would all become Variegata.
And that wouldn't be beyond the realm of belief for me. I mean, if they all became subspecies of Variegata, I'm cool with that, to some extent.
Which is back to what we used to have them as.
Yeah,
we used to have them all as Variegata, and then you could maintain the race McCarthy and the race Gungle and the race McDowell within Variegata, which is what we originally argued. Is that they should all be races?
Well, or subspecies or whatever biologically significant term you want to apply doesn't bother me. But subspecies, race, I guess depending on who's doing the taxonomy and who's describing them, So, but yeah, definitely a puzzle or a taxonomic conundrum here. So,
and I think this is why we do see people that sort of go, well, there's a bit of an issue here,
Yeah.
And it definitely requires some further scientific, all the stuff that we include in the book is just our musings based on, all the information that we're gathering together being fans of carpet pythons. But that's only hypotheses or ideas, and anybody can take that and, delve into the scientific aspect of it. And, we're having a taxonomist, Warren Booth, analyze samples and, try to put our hat in the ring in that regard, bringing him on as an actual taxonomist. So I still need to talk to him and see what's going on. That's kind of what we're waiting for, along with the photo layout of the book is that genetic analysis and where we see things lying. But
did you just say that Warren Booth is holding up the carpet book?
with the photo layout.
Wow,
I
you
reckon-
just
I
put
reckon-
them on.
things that are
But
going on.
everyone's like, "Oh, we want that carbon book." Now it's like, Warren, let's go.
I will
Maybe
say
you
that
need to give him some new IPA, get him some IPA across the
right.
line and help him out.
That's right. And granted, he's being held up by the people who are running the genetic samples, so it's not his
No,
fault.
I'm not
Yeah.
trying to.
You're
bust
trying to
Warren's-
throw Warren under the bus, aren't you?
No, I'm not. No, I am not.
I didn't hear
Wow.
that. I didn't hear that
Yeah,
at all. All I heard
thank
was
you,
that
Scott.
I didn't hear that at all. What I heard was that both Chuck and I think that Warren is doing a great service
No.
to making sure that he's
Oh,
actually being
now I see
diligent
how it is.
in making
Yeah.
his thing. Are you suggesting that he's not, Justin?
Snap,
Once again,
diligent.
Once again, my
snap
co-host
judgments
goes
are crap
against me.
judgments. Yeah.
Once
I'm not
again,
going
my
against.
co-host
Listen,
throwing me under the
I
bus.
make my own statements. I make my own statements. I cannot help, sir, how you interpret them. What is this? I lose all these coin tosses, and now I'm driving buses for a living? What the hell?
All right. Well, Warren, you're a good man, and we appreciate your work.
That's what I'm saying.
I think that's what we're all saying.
He's being Warren. Yeah, that's what we're going to close on. We're going to suggest that Warren is a great bloke. That's what we're saying.
Yeah, I can agree.
Yeah.
Well, this
right.
has been a great discussion.
It has been a great discussion.
I know that the Aussies typically don't like Americans sticking their nose where it doesn't belong and Aussie snakes, but
I disagree
I appreciate
completely.
I'm glad to hear that because I appreciate the discussion and the camaraderie that we feel from you. I don't get that sense from you at all. So
Look, I suppose, and our position, and I'll sort of close on this, in that our position to utilise the position of races as opposed to making subspecific determinations in regards to carpet pythons was based on the shallowness of the genetic divergence in the populations, and based on how willing the various phenotypes are to interbreed with each other, and that the diagnoses of the various species, subspecies, was not the best, I suppose, and that there was a lot of inference that could be made. And rather than making a whole heap of inferences, we decided to err on the side of caution and suggest that there's some partitioning and there's some divergence there, but that more work needs to be done to actually apply either specific or subspecific names to those particular groups. And once that work is completed, then we might change our position completely as to where these things sit. And I think we need to be willing to accept that there is always going to be change with greater amounts of evidence, and that greater amount of evidence may suggest that things are species, or it might actually change our opinion of that and actually make them races or subspecies or just color variants. Who knows? So,
well, once again, dang it, Scott, we agree on more than we should be agreeing, I guess, in a fight club. But no, I agree with you that I think more work needs to be done, and that we don't have the best picture at the current time. There needs to be a lot of restructuring potentially, or just referring to things as races. I think that's reasonable. I don't think that's beyond the realm of reality. So thanks for coming on and for this lively discussion. It was really enjoyable and I had a good time. So I think this is one of our longer episodes too, which is not a surprise. I knew that would probably be the case having Scott on. So.
Well, I can talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles, so
and I probably fall into that category as well. So, but it's definitely a great discussion, and hopefully our listener got something out of this and could maybe formulate their own opinion. And it's always fun to think about how things could could parse out. And I think the main thing, I guess my closing statement is, I had this idea of what carpet pythons were based on, maybe the Barker book and based on some lineages that we had in the United States, and actually going over to Australia and seeing things in the wild, or gathering photos from a specific area. You see that, the rules and the ideas that we had about these things were completely off. And maybe that's the case now with the subspecies. Well, most likely is the case with the subspecies as they are now. And, more work needs to be done. But I think it's a good encouragement to get out there and herp, look at stuff in the wild, see stuff in your backyard. Even, I mean, getting down to Arizona was a blast, and to see some species that I hadn't seen before, just a thrill to be able to experience something new. And the more you do it, the more you can learn, and the more you can grow and develop different ideas and hypotheses. But what a fun area to spend time thinking about. So thanks for
all about having
enjoyable discussion. Yeah, definitely. If you're not enjoying it, if it's slogging through this stuff, if you can't look at some of these papers and get all excited, then you're probably in the wrong area, and granted, some things I get into some papers and it, just kind of goes over my head, or I don't get it. So I don't get that excited about it, but this stuff gets me pretty pumped up. So thanks for coming on, Scott. Go ahead.
The one thing I think too, I hate the term lumper and splitter. And I'll tell you why, right? Because at times I'm a lumper and at times I'm a splitter.
Okay.
But the thoughts there is where you should try and be led by the evidence, as opposed to making a position that everyone's always going to lump or everyone's always going to split. I think people should be open to the thought that things could be split, but then they should also be lumped together, and not everything should be lumped and not everything should be split.
Fair enough. Yeah. I guess I've been guilty of that. Yeah. I think I was the one that said lumper and splitter earlier on, and thought of Steve Donnellan as a lumper, but I probably should take that back. Yeah. So, good stuff, man. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate you being here.
Thanks, guys.
Anything else, Chuck?
No.
Anything to add?
No, this was fantastic. I enjoyed the ride. Thank you. Even though I was driving the bus, I enjoyed the ride.
Yeah, you didn't even need to split us up or tell us to calm down.
Guys were great. I didn't even need to be here. Actually, I was on mute.
Fight.
I was on mute telling my cattle dog to shut up because it was over here just yapping away, man.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks for listening to Reptile Fight Club. We'll be with you again next week. And till then, keep the fight going.
Catch you next time, carpet kids.
Fight Club.